Hey, how are you? I hope you're having a swell day. Thank you for joining me on my trip. It's always nice to have company on these long drives. Sit back, relax, please. Get comfortable. You deserve it. How about this? I've got 3 options for you. I can play some music for you, or I can let you drift away to the road ambience, or I can tell you an old story about my family. The choice is yours. I'll leave these options laid out in front of you for a moment. But if you stay here, then I'll assume you'd like to hear a story. It's okay if you fall asleep while I tell you this story. You seem tired. Enjoy the trip. I'd really like to tell you the story of my stepdaughter, Elisabeth. A few years ago, while she was engaged to my oldest son, Jacob, something strange had happened. But it would turn out to be a miracle in disguise. Her and Jacob knew each other from college, and I had seen her a few times over Christmas and Thanksgiving, and I had gotten to know her quite well. She was a nice young lady. She was Japanese. She had been adopted as a baby, so she had never actually been to Japan. And her parents, well, they were as American as they come. Now, one day, while Elisabeth and Jacob were planning their wedding, Elisabeth had received an email. This email had came from someone she'd never really heard of or met, someone with a Japanese name. And at the time, she thought the email was spam. The email was in broken English and she could hardly understand it. Other than that, it seemed to come from someone claiming to be a long-lost relative. She had never met anyone in Japan, so she disregarded it. But then, she got another email about a week later from the same person. So this time, she read it more carefully, and she was stunned by what it said. She called over Jacob to read it. The email had been from a woman named Natsu, who claimed to be her sister from Japan. Apparently, Natsu had been orphaned and adopted as well, but she was a year older than Elisabeth. She had done some digging recently and found that both their birth parents had died in a fire when they were infants. While digging around for this information about their parents, she had heard about Elisabeth, and curious about her American sister, Natsu had done some research and gotten a hold of Elisabeth's email from her job. At the time, Jacob and Elisabeth were still quite skeptical. They admitted that Natsu seemed to know a lot, but Natsu had expressed interest in meeting and getting to know Elisabeth. But Jacob was worried that this was possibly a scam, that Natsu had simply been a scam artist with access to delicate information, and that Natsu was using this information to get them to send money or a plane ticket, or that Natsu might have just been some scary guy in Japan trying to take advantage of a vulnerable American woman to get her to come over to Japan and meet him alone. But Elisabeth wanted to believe that this was really her long-lost sister. Over the next few days, they had been in close contact, exchanging pictures and stories about their lives. Elisabeth had showed her fiancé a picture of Natsu. Jacob admitted that there was a bit of a resemblance, but he was still skeptical. It was risky, but after talking it over for a while with Natsu, Elisabeth wanted to meet her sister. So they tried to figure out a way that would be less costly. Was it for Natsu to come to the United States, or was it for Elisabeth to go to Japan? They found that it would be significantly less for Elisabeth to simply fly out to Japan, and for her sister to meet her when she got there. Jacob tried to convince Elisabeth that it was dangerous for her to go to another country, a country whose language she did not know. But Elisabeth was determined to meet her long-lost sister. This came at a critical time for them, as they were saving for their wedding. so Jacob would stay home to save money. Elisabeth agreed to pay for her ticket there as long as Natsu would agree to pay for her ticket back. But Jacob was still worried about Elisabeth going to another country that she had never been to before. Elisabeth didn't speak any Japanese, and it didn't seem like Natsu spoke English either. Jacob called up his brother, Mark, who luckily was able to set them up with a friend of his from college. Jacob's friend's name always slips my mind. I'll refer to him as G for now. G was a foreign exchange student, a very smart guy, graduated top of his class, and he spoke both English and Japanese. And it just so happens that he lived in a city only a few hours from where Natsu lived. They called up G and asked him to be their translator while Elisabeth was in Japan. G agreed. Natsu and G all planned to meet in Nagoya in a restaurant called Keno. Elisabeth took a few days off, packed her bags, and ordered a ticket to Nagoya. Once Elisabeth got to Nagoya, she stayed in a hotel, navigating interactions with staff by shuffling through a small handful of flashcards. Looking back, I'm sure she butchered a lot of the pronunciations, but she tried. Later, she explained that a lot of what she said prompted a lot of strange looks from the locals. The next day at noon, she rode a bus to the restaurant where she was supposed to meet her sister and G. She was the first one there. She sat at the table, and for the first 20 minutes, she was very nervous, hoping that G would show up first. Eventually, she saw a man approach the table, and she held her breath, hoping it was G and not whoever she'd been emailing. Turns out it was G. He sat down at the table and helped her order. G and Elisabeth talked and waited for Natsu to show up, but the food came out before Natsu did. They had planned to wait, but at some point they just started eating, and then all the food was gone, and over an hour had passed, and she was supposed to be there by then. At this point, they were becoming impatient. They tried calling Natsu, but she wouldn't pick up voicemail. At this point, Elisabeth was mad. She thought she had been stood up. She tried to be delicate, as he brought up the possibility that it might have been a scam after all. They called Jacob and told him the news, and he agreed. Maybe it had all been a setup, but they couldn't figure out why. They hadn't sent Natsu any money. Why would she pretend and agree to meet her in the first place if she was just going to stand her up? It didn't make sense. It had been over 2 hours before they finally got a call from Natsu. Elisabeth picked up and handed the phone to G. She was upset. She was on the verge of tears on her way back home, wondering why they had stood her up. She was tough to understand at first, but once they got her to calm down, G was able to piece the story together. Their plans had gotten mixed up in translation. While Elisabeth had planned to meet her sister in Nagoya at a restaurant called Kaina, Natsu had thought they wanted to meet in the town of Kaina, which was 3 hours away. She had spent the last 2 hours sitting on a park bench, waiting for them to meet up with her for lunch apparently. She had tried calling them multiple times, but due to bad reception in Kaina, it kept going to voicemail. Immediately, Elisabeth felt bad and upset. As sad and alone as she felt for the last 2 hours, her sister might have felt worse, being left alone in a park. But now it was mid-afternoon, and the sisters were 3 hours apart. Was there no hope of meeting now? After all they had been through, she wouldn't give up on meeting her sister, and Elisabeth went right away. They had made plans to meet at Natsu's house for dinner. Elisabeth went right to rent a car and drive there. Sadly, G wouldn't be able to make it, since it was a 6-hour round trip, so Elisabeth would have to go alone. Elisabeth said goodbye to G, and thanked him for the help he provided so far, and then she began on her trip. And later that evening, Natsu and her family greeted Elisabeth. They hugged Elisabeth as she came in. Natsu had a husband and 2 kids. They had a great dinner together, and they let her stay the night afterwards since it was late. Natsu and her family couldn't understand anything Elisabeth was saying, but they were able to use the translator on their phones to communicate. It wasn't perfect, but they were able to enjoy slow, simple conversations. And Elisabeth even learned some Japanese. They're really good friends now. They don't see each other often, but Jacob and Elisabeth keep in touch with Natsu and her husband over email. Actually, they're planning to go back this fall for their anniversary. And hopefully, they'll all get the location right this time.